Hi, today I will discuss about the weathering and the related landforms produced by the weathering activities in the Earth's surface. Weathering in geology is the natural breakdown of rocks and minerals in places of the Earth's surface. In shaping and reshaping the land, weathering actually acts as a major role in different parts of the Earth's surface under different climatic conditions. Weathering broadly classified as the physical or mechanical weathering, number 2 chemical weathering, and number 3 biological weathering. The processes of breakdown of rocks into smaller pieces or particles actually creating regoliths and soils which are essential to the different landscapes of the earth under different rock bodies. So now I am starting with the physical or the mechanical weathering. So in this case, what happens? By this process, it breaks the rock into smaller particles without changing its chemical composition. Often, they are driven by the temperature and pressure changes. So, in different weather and climatic conditions, particularly in the cold environment, the frost wedging, freeze or thaw process by these processes, when water enters into the cracks of the rocks and they freeze and they expand in the volume. So ultimately, what happens? The rocks are broken into pieces by the expanded volume of the ice. So this is known as the freeze-thaw process, or it is the frost wedging process, which occur particularly in the high altitude mountain systems where temperature is very low, and even in the polar environment this is broadly found. And the second one is the exfoliation, which is particularly found in the warm environment and in our country where the granitic rocks are there or gneissic terrains after metamorphic process, when they are already deformed. In that case, by the pressure release over the granitic rock bodies, causing the outer layers of rock to flake off, and which occur commonly in the warm areas of the country. We have seen such types of the onion skin weathering over the granitic rocks in the Ajodhya Pahar in Balrampur district, in Balrampur areas of the Purulia district. And there we have seen that how the core stone boulders are developed, and from the core areas of the rock by the deep core weathering and the pressure release, how the rocks are separated from the main bodies of the hills, and ultimately the core stone boulders and the other materials detached from the rock bodies are deposited in the pediment, the rock pediment surface. And particularly under the hot and humid environment, such types of the exfoliation domes are actually found in different parts of our country. I remember one case when with my students I visited the Ghantasila Pahar of Rusikolla river mouth near Chilika Lake, and there we have seen that how much amount of the onion skin weathering and their big volumes of the boulders and the boulder stones are distributed along the rock pediment surface of the granitic hills. And the third one is the abrasion force, or the abrasion process of the physical weathering or the mechanical weathering. The mechanical strength are coming from the wind energy, water energy, and ice energy, the ice flow or the glacier energy. So what happens in this case, the rocks, when they are transported across the surface or they are moving across the slopes of the mountains, so they are colliding with each other of the boulders and particles and producing the frictions with the surface or the gradients of the hills. So ultimately they are broken into different pieces of particles. And when in the marine environment I have seen, particularly for the case of the Andaman, I have seen that how the coral stone boulders and the limestone boulders are fragmented from the bank of the coralline tracts, and then they are ultimately moved towards the high tide line by the strong wave energy and tidal energy. And when they rolled down across the surface, so they producing the friction with the local surface and also colliding with the other particles to produce the different sizes of the boulders and the gravels, pebbles. So these types of the materials we have seen in the shore platform margins, and by this abrasion weathering process. And the second major weathering process is known as the chemical weathering. So in this case of the weathering process, what happens? The process alters the molecular structure of the minerals, often caused by the water, acids, and oxygen. In this case, when oxidation takes place, that means when oxygen reacts with the iron in rocks, causing them to rust and weaken, particularly for the case of the hematitic rocks in the Chotnagpur Plateau area during monsoon periods, when the water reacts with the molecular structure of the iron minerals, then the rusting takes place within the rock surface. So the reddish or the reddish stones over the rocks that is visible in this area by the oxidation process. Then carbonations or the dissolution process. So carbonation process, when slightly acidic rainwater or the carbonic acids dissolves the minerals, particularly in the limestone terrains. For the case of Andaman, we have seen that when rain occurs and it passes across the forest canopy and along the trunks, and they are coming into the root zone across the surface and through the cracks. So then the organic acids also mixing with them, and dissolved carbonic acids are also produced with the mixing of the local limestone terrain surface. And ultimately the dissolution process occurs. So by this dissolution process, the limestone features or the terrain modifications we have observed in Andaman in the carbonate rocks. So they are the caving and and other karstic features are also produced by the dissolutions activities. And the third important chemical weathering process is known as the hydrolysis. So by this process, what happens when water reacts with the minerals such as feldspar. Suppose feldspar is present in the granitic rocks. When water reacts with the feldspar minerals within the rock. So they form a new weaker compounds that is known as the clay. So clay minerals are produced over a time when water reacts with the feldspar. Similarly, with laterites, with basalt, when water reacts, then the smectite clay from the basalt is produced, and montmorillonite clay is produced from the lateritic materials, and then the kaolinite clay and also aelitic clay. So these the different types of the clay minerals are actually produced by the hydrolysis process when water reacts with the minerals. Now finally, the biological weathering. Biological weathering, which actually breaks down the rocks and causing by the physical or the chemical action of the living organisms. Living organisms means the role of the plants and the role of the animals. So if we consider about the role of the plants, there we have seen that how the root wedging, that means when plant roots grow into the cracks of the rocks, so forcing them apart, they are forcing them apart. That means the rocks are broken into two different or three different particles or the parts by the penetrations of the roots into the cracks. I have seen for the case of the Ross Island in Andaman, the buildings were constructed in 1870s or 80s at that time, but presently when we have seen that how the banyan trees and by their roots, how they have penetrated into the cracks of the buildings, and buildings are broken into different fragments. So that is then we realize what is the strength of the penetration of the roots into the rocks or into the buildings. And then the organic acids, another important biological weathering process which occur usually in the different rock surfaces, particularly when microbes and the lichens produce chemicals that break down the rock surfaces. I have seen for the case of the carbonate rocks in Andaman, across the high tide zone, over the rocks cliffs, we have seen that how the thick layer of the microbes or lichens are located, and they are producing the chemicals in the breakdown of the carbonate rocks, particularly through the cracks, and they are also getting affected by the process of the biochemical weathering activities. And the third important part of the biological weathering is the burrowing animals that we have seen in the lateritic terrains of our West Midnapur district along the salt forest areas, that how the white ant, they are actually burrowing the rocks, and they are actually lifting the soils, the burrowed materials from the underground over the surface and producing the termite hills. So this is a typical process of the burrowing animals in the weathering process over the lateritic surface. So finally, we can say that weathering rates are actually affected by climatic diversities. That means in the hot and humid climate favors the chemical weathering, and the dry and cold climatic zones or the weather activities favors the physical weathering process and their rates. And the third one is the rock types. That means if it is limestone or if it is the laterites, so the rate of weathering process will be more faster in compared to the other rocks. Then the composition, the mineral composition within the rocks, that is also very important. Factors playing, which is influencing directly the rate of the weathering process. And finally, the time. The time is also very important factors, which is playing the very significant role for the degradations of the rocks and the rate of the weathering process. So thank you, students. So in the later part, I will discuss about the impacts of the weathering over the different types of the landforms in India.